The first seat that we tried was squeaky, so my dad moved us to a less noisy location. The Bartlesville Symphony Orchestra had not yet come onto the stage, so there were lots of noises of rustling and movement around us. They played in a very large, beautiful concert hall in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, much larger than a community that size would typically have afforded. Oil money helps. My mom was seated in the first chair of the second row of violins directly behind the concert master. It was always her seat. In every orchestra she ever played in, I always remember her on the end of that second row. I have no memory of the content of that concert. I'd likely heard most of it several times before dressing in my suit and accompanying my dad to the formal presentation that night. I would often do my homework on the floor of the vast hallways outside the main hall before exploring the otherwise closed area outside of that. While my mom practiced, I roamed. The notes of the music echoing through the halls of that vast arena were my soundtrack to my imagination. The music for those concerts was often a collection of classical and pop music, frequently including one piece that my mom didn't care for because it was in a minor key or it was too modern, and one piece that she absolutely adored and loved to play. A complicated selection, too difficult for most community volunteer orchestras to tackle, was often thrown in the mix. Sometimes they came up short. Most often they nailed it, at least I thought they did, and I can always look at my mom and look at her face and tell if she were pleased with the effort. That night, that particular concert, I learned a more valuable lesson than the notes of the music would teach me. If the conductor's baton is in motion, one is to remain silent, especially at the end of the piece, regardless of your enjoyment of it or the necessity to leave that space as quickly as possible. One is silent and still. With the conductor's baton still in the air, the tip pointed up as if aligned with a star somewhere. The musicians, the choir, the audience, even the 14-year-old teenager were to remain silent. Modern audiences immediately applaud. The rock concert, the soloist at church. The kids' third grade recorder concert. They all erupt in applause, sometimes even before the final note is through. That's my baby. Way to go, Sarah. The soloist starts the phrase before the game, and the home of the brave. And the crowd is already on their feet, screaming, play ball. Let's get on with things. The music, yeah, all right, that was great. It was nice, but we've got other important things to move on to, and they must happen immediately. It was not so on that night. The bows were off the strings, and the drumsticks were firmly in hands away from the drum heads. The echo of the last note, though, the echo was still in the air. Instruments and eardrums were still exchanging ideas as the baton was still pointed straight up. Already? Not yet. Bouncing off the high ceilings and walls, echoing through the dark hallways that I had run through the night before, the last note, the combination of all that preceded it, the culmination of everything before was still in the air, alive. The author's intent for that piece, fully expressed through notes and sound, had been accomplished, and the conductor, baton not yet ready to lower, held our gaze and invited us to begin the process of thinking about, maybe appreciating all of it. For that moment, baton in the air, that liminal moment, the in-between gasp when all is silent and contemplative and hushed, that moment was awesome. In it were appreciation and humility and joy and quiet. This was a moment of understanding, the communal experience between all who were gathered in that space, that we had not one single thing more to contribute to that moment. That moment was sufficient in and of itself. Baton still pointed straight up. What had preceded was complete, but our time of appreciation of it was not yet ready to commence. That moment, not defined by the absence of sound, but by the presence of silence. Already. Not yet. We hear tell that the angels approached a group of shepherds, the lowliest of the low, with good news of great joy for all people. And there must have been a silent gasp. A moment of recognition of the awesome responsibility and joy that accompanied their message. But was this message a blessing or a curse? Was this announcement really good news? The shepherds didn't know, because it was still just that one moment, that moment when they recognized the absence of a Savior, yet the awesome presence of God's love. Already, not yet. The anticipation of the chorister, the young schoolboy, standing on the back row of the people's side of that massive hall of King's College Chapel, Cambridge. The breath taken right before starting once in royal David's city, filling the lungs with that perfect note ready to burst forth, already but not yet. The echo of that cavernous room after the very last note is sung by those tiny yet massive voices. The fingers and feet lifted from the thunderous organ at the center of that chapel of kings. That moment, contemplation, reflection, appreciation, humility, absence, presence. That moment when the cries of a baby finally fall silent. That moment. The absence of sound. The presence of peace. May you know that moment sometime. May you know that moment. The absence of pain and struggle and loss. The presence of joy and peace and love. May you know that moment, that precise moment. Just that one. Most notably felt at Christmas.